A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a very special session of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2021. As you are aware, the Asia Economic Dialogue is one of India's premier geoeconomics conferences, and it is sponsored by the Ministry of External Affairs of India and organized by the Pune International Center. My name is Gautam Bambawale. I'm a trustee of the Pune International Center. But my very special guest this evening for a fireside chat is a guest of honor, and it is none other than Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla. To most of us in India, he needs no introduction whatsoever. But for our participants from other parts of the globe, he is one of India's top industrialists, leading businessmen. He is chairman of the Aditya Birla Group, which has businesses across a swath of industries, including cement, textiles, non-ferrous metals, carbon black, solar power, financial services, and many more. This was just an indicative list and not an exhaustive one. Mr. Birla has taken the group turnover from 2 billion US dollars in 1995 to 46.3 billion US dollars today. The Aditya Birla Group has facilities not just in India, but also in countries like Indonesia, China, Egypt, Thailand, and others. It has a workforce of 120,000 people belonging to 42 different nationalities. Mr. Birla has received innumerable awards over the years. If I were to list them out, we would spend many minutes and probably a whole hour on it. Welcome to the Asia Economic Dialogue 2021, Mr. Birla. And let me dive straight into my first question, if you permit me.
Of course, it's
In-
a pleasure to be here, Ms. Bambale.
Thank you. Thank you. If you permit me, I'll dive into my first question, which is that the entire world, including India, is still going through and experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic. There are also economic issues and problems emanating from the lockdowns, which were necessary as a result of this pandemic, as well as from the impact of the COVID 19 virus itself. How did your companies tackle these problems, sir? How are they doing now? Can you please share with us how you took on these issues and problems?
So, as we all know, Mr. Bambawale, that this has been really a crisis of unprecedented magnitude, to say the very least, with the initial response of very harsh lockdowns. One felt uh, weighed down and stemmed in. But truly, the economy has been hit, as you would know better than me, by three shocks: by a demand shock, by a supply shock, as also a wealth shock, with the kind of fall that we've seen in stock markets and in asset markets. I must say that our group has weathered storms in the past. In 1997, the Southeast Asian crisis, where we have a large presence, and we came out looking very unscathed. Of course, the 2008 global financial crisis. But this last year has been very different. It's not been caused by any underlying economic or business fundamentals. So to that extent, the positive is that there is no long-term structural setback to the economy. But having said that, it has been a very turbulent time nonetheless. We've seen some crazy gyrations in economic variables, very high volatility. Price of oil in April, as we remember, was minus $37. Now it's close to $70. Stock markets that crashed by about 40% rose by nearly 50 to 60% in the few months after that. Commodity prices are on a roller coaster. I think what we did very clearly was to give primacy to security, safety, and health of our employees and the safety of operations. We followed the protocols of social distancing, sanitization, etc. Very, very meticulously. Uh, we shifted to a new way of working. And I must tell you that the electricity of that, the speed and seamlessness of that was something that took me by surprise. The speed with which we were able to, and these are many teams across the country and across the globe, as you can imagine, to move to seamless working from home, continue to acquire new customers, engage with our value chain partners was to me very energizing, and I feel a great sense of pride. Being the leader of so many competent and committed people in Aditya Birla Group, I think we are now moving very quickly from resilience to renewal. I see a lot of buoyancy and business optimism. Most of our businesses have reported better earnings in Q3 than they did last year. So I'd say that we're coming out of the pandemic definitely looking stronger. We have fortified our balance sheets even further. We also leverage the power of digital tech, and I think we come out feeling much stronger uh, and much more confident as a business group.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Bidla. That was indeed heartwarming, because if a major industrial group such as yours is being able to overcome the problems of the pandemic, it suggests that other parts of industry, other parts of the economy will also do so. You're absolutely right that this has been a different kind of crisis, as you said, not the usual kind of shocks, whether it was a currency shock or something else. And India herself has been impacted hugely by this once in 100 years pandemic. India's GDP has contracted in fiscal 21 by roughly 7.5%. What do you expect where India, a country as a whole, is concerned in fiscal 22? Do you think that the monetary easing announced by the Reserve Bank of India and the fiscal measures taken by the government of India over several months now, will they be sufficient to help the Indian economy rebound in fiscal 22? As a captain of Indian industry, how are you planning to ensure that your companies ride this wave to greater profitability?
So I think after the initial, period of lockdown, it was very harsh at that time, felt very harsh. It was really a lives versus livelihoods issue. But as we know now, I think the government took very wise steps which have contained the pandemic so well in a country of our size. But later in the year, we saw strong support both from the monetary and the fiscal authorities, massive liquidity support from the RBI, as we know, given not just to banks but also to non-banks. The help that they extended to small businesses, um, a recognition from the RBI of the crisis in terms of unprecedented business conditions, calling for forbearance in terms of moratorium on loan payments, possibly restructuring of loans. Special loan guarantee package was given to the MSMEs, which I know helped them and gave them huge headroom and relief. You also saw from the government income and food ration support given to the vulnerable sections of society, especially in rural areas. Fortunately for us, agricultural production has continued to be at record levels. And by the time September was coming to an end, the September quarter, we in the group, and I think broadly across the economy, saw demand come back strongly. Manufacturing, for example, saw a ramping up of production capacities to almost full capacity. Um, and I think that the earlier monetary and fiscal stimulus have been topped up with the strong fiscal stimulus, even stronger fiscal stimulus in the union budget. The focus on health, on spend on infrastructure, I think are very appropriate, very apparent that the government is trying to fire up risk capital, energize the private sector. It's been a really outstanding budget, talking about privatizing of banks, insurance companies, monetizing land assets. And I haven't seen such a sustained euphoric reaction to a budget up until now, so many days, so many weeks after the budget was called out. We've done very well, even if I should say so myself. In the last 2 months, we've announced projects worth $2.8 billion across our businesses. For example, cement, we've recorded quarter-on-quarter growth for 2 consecutive quarters. Our metal business has just announced plans to double our downstream capacity. Novelis, which is our rolled sheet aluminum product business, the largest in the world, has just completed or completed a 2.8 billion acquisition right in the throes of the pandemic. Some of the smaller businesses, for example, health insurance, leveraged digital beautifully and has grown much ahead of its industry. So I see a very sharp recovery with double-digit growth, and I see that consumer and business confidence are coming back really strongly.
That's indeed very heartening to hear, Mr. Birla, because there are predictions that the Indian economy will grow in fiscal 2022 by 10% and more. But I think what you are validating for all our listeners is the fact that there has been a rebound, not only of demand, but also of supply, and also, of course, aided by monetary measures by the Reserve Bank, fiscal measures by the Government of India, both earlier and also in its current budget. And you're absolutely right. I studied economics, but then later was a diplomat. But I haven't heard any economist being able to really find any kind of loophole or criticize any part of the union budget which was presented by our honorable finance minister. So that is something which I found quite telling over the last few weeks, as you rightly pointed out. Uh,
Absolutely.
Overall, both investment as well as GDP growth in India have been depressed for several years now. In your view, what steps of economic reform do we need to take as a country, as a nation, as a society to recapture our earlier growth momentum, with where we had reached, GDP growth rates of 7 to 8%? Can we in India aspire for our economy to once again grow at 8% per annum or even more, maybe?
Absolutely. That there is no doubt about in my mind, and no one should have any kind of apprehensions about that. I'd say, in fact, that the plumbing, so to speak, has already been done. Economic reforms needed to push us onto a higher growth trajectory, in fact, have been put in place. Um, I remember the budget, Dr. Manmohan Singh's budget in 1991. I was just sort of starting off in my business career. I remember watching it with my father, and the sense of excitement was palpable. And I must say that I think of 2021 as the new 1991, so to speak, in terms of just the impact of reforms. I think that the 2020s will be India's decade. The reforms of 91 were spurred by a balance of crisis payments. And since then, one has seen economic reform being pursued, but in a very incremental way. But in recent months, there's a clear departure from that incrementalism. So for example, consolidation of labor laws into a modern labor code, agricultural reform to unshackle the farm sector that has such an important role to play in our economy, a clear-cut framework of announcement on privatization. All of these show palpable boldness and conviction from the government, which really is quite unprecedented. The new framework of asset reconstruction, for example, the insolvency code, I think, will go a very long way in solving the NPA problem, both of banks and as corporates, which in any case is looking much better now. I'm very enthused by the ambitious national infrastructure pipeline and the impact it will have to build crucial assets and physical capital. And I think on the back of that, uh, there will be a virtuous cycle of an investment boom, and I see us, in fact, looking as a country at multi-decadal growth. So very exciting times for us, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Very exciting times ahead of us as a nation, as a country, as a society. And I was indeed struck, Mr. Birla, by your comparison of the 1991 budget and the 2021 budget. You're absolutely right there. I couldn't, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers will also agree with you entirely there, especially those who know India and who know India well. You have spoken a little bit about some of the new investments that you have made in from your group. I was wondering whether you can tell us something about the new businesses that you intend to start in the coming months and years. And can you tell us something about these new bets, please?
So I think that it's important to give the context that these new bets are both a reflection of the solidity of the group and equally a vote of confidence in India's economy today and the progress that we expect to see in the economy at an altogether higher level going forward. To give you a sense, our cement business, Ultratech, has embarked on a fresh capex of $800 million to increase our capacity by almost 15 million tons to about 140 million tons. Like I said earlier, our metals company, Hindalco, has announced that it will double its capacity in the downstream part of the business. And I believe that that investment will be nothing short of about $1 billion. Um, Grasim, which is our large, uh, you know, flagship in some ways,
Yes.
and currently holds a fiber and cement and chemicals asset, has identified and called out paints as a new sector of growth, um, also reflecting on the rising incomes of people and their desire to have, better quality houses, lifestyles. Our fashion retail, for example, has now looked across horizons and made more specific plans than they ever had in the past. So it's all a reflection of rising in incomes and the aspirational Indian that are kickstarting all of these kinds of investments. So it's been a hectic time for us at the group, and I foresee even more exciting times going forward.
No, absolutely. It sounds very exciting. It sounds as if you have been working day and night. And I would like to once again thank you for having taken time out from your busy schedule to be with us. In recent times, there is increasing talk and belief in reliability and resilience of global supply chains. As the head of a group with firms in different parts of the world, how important do you think this is? Can India take advantage of this desire and attract more foreign direct investment? Because I think we all know that India requires foreign direct investment. The ease of doing business is improving in India. So, can India take advantage of this desire and attract more foreign direct investment into our country? What further changes do you think we need to make in our business environment in order to attract foreign firms and more foreign firms to India?
Hmm. So I think I'd first say, Ms. Bambawale, that the more important thing in my mind is to get the private sector, starting off making investments through capex, even more than getting foreign investment into India. But obviously, the two go hand in hand. My own view is that India is much closer to becoming a global hub for manufacturing. We have the right demographics, we have the talent pool, uh, the kind of reforms recently that we've been talking about, and a huge domestic market. Besides that, there's a history of us building global sized businesses for many decades in the past: auto, pharma, metal, software services. So there's a global track record of global excellence and scale. There's also a need that companies are now feeling, as we know, to insure themselves or de-risk themselves from China. Uh, Economic reforms to build champions out of China. The production-linked incentive scheme
Yes.
uh, is, I think, very interesting, very path breaking. Uh, it basically is to create global giants in certain chosen sectors out of India. That seemed like a very well thought out long-term plan for encouraging industry out of India. We see the strong influx of investment dollars. Our forex reserves today, I believe, is the fourth highest in the world. So obviously, policy making in that direction has been good. Uh, so I set great store by manufacturing. We have a stated ambition, as you know, as a nation to take manufacturing to 25% of GDP. I believe that the impact that manufacturing has on creating employment is very significant. And I think that this increase in interest in investment in the manufacturing sector, propelled by all the things we spoke about, is a very positive development for us as an economy.
I couldn't agree with you more when you said that, or when you hinted that there is a lot of entrepreneurial talent in India, and we need to give free rein, so to speak, to that entrepreneurial talent, so that Indians themselves start new businesses here, apart from, of course, foreign companies also investing here. So I think you're absolutely on the dot there. And from what the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and other members of his cabinet have been saying, I think that's the thinking, both in government and, of course, outside government, and that is very, very clear. But internationally, Mr. Birla, there are increasing tensions between the United States on the one hand and China on the other. And this is a fact of life. You mentioned about the productivity linked incentive schemes. There is a distinct possibility of the world being sort of pulled between these two countries, the United States on the one hand and China on the other. How do Indian companies handle this situation? Can you advise Indian entrepreneurs, Indian business leaders, how we can handle these tensions, which are becoming a fact of life for us?
So to answer that, I think the first thing I'd like to say is that I see a slight retreat of globalization. I see globalization as of now giving way to more of regionalization, and a multinational like us, Aditya Birla Group, has to reshift gears or shift gears and shift strategy a little bit on account of that. It is a very fluid world, and we have to keep, in a sense, being a reflection of what is happening in the real world around us. I see us becoming much more regional in the kind of capacities we set up, in the way that we look at our businesses. So, for example, two of our businesses that are, truly global champions. Novelis, like I said earlier, is the world's largest sheet metal company. Birla Carbon is the largest producer of carbon black, which is a crucial raw material in tire making. Uh, Both these businesses have a truly global footprint spreading across 5 continents. We've had a long-standing regional structure, which has helped us in these times to navigate the domestic trade, the dynamic trade environment, as opposed to some of our competition who've had, structures that span across borders, and who now feel the pinch because of the fact that regionalism is sort of becoming more the norm than globalization. So I think it's important to be local, yet global. I think, like I said, national concerns are coming to the fore. Clearly see nationalism and regionalization, taking precedence over globalization. Globalization, as it's called, will
Yeah.
also challenge the conventional, wisdom of building, let's say, one very large scale capacity to maybe building slightly smaller capacities, but across continents, across nations. So I think this whole process of regionalization, nationalism, and globalization is going to have some very interesting fallouts.
Yeah. That's a very interesting term or terminology that you've used of globalization. Very, very interesting. As a former ambassador of India to China, I'm hopeful that the impending sort of fight between these two big boys, the United States on the one hand, China on the other. I'm hopeful that middle powers like India, Australia, Japan, France, UK will be able to help bridge the gap between these two big powers. But I don't know, we have to wait and see how that develops at the geopolitical level. But coming back to economics, in our neighborhood, in the Indo-Pacific and in the Asia-Pacific, as it used to be called earlier, India has stayed out of this big free trade agreement called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, RCEP, as some people call it. What are your reactions to that? When do you think Indian industry will be competitive enough to participate in such FTAs? We have FTAs with some countries, but to have stayed out of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement was something which came as a shock to some of us, if not all of us. But how do we, when will we be competitive enough to participate in these FTAs?
I'm happy you asked this question, Ms. Bambawale, because I don't think it's about competitiveness of Indian industry at all. One can give several examples of industry sectors where India is truly at equal footing with global competition. I gave you two examples of our own businesses. Our cement business is the third largest in the world, excluding the Chinese players. In metals, we're the largest aluminum company in the world, so on and so forth. So I don't think it's about competitiveness at all. And for example, a group like us and so many others in India uh, are hardly going to quibble about free trade and open borders. But I think what's important is that there has to be a sense of equity amongst all the players who are signatories to something like the RCEP. You can't have the same borders that are being opened up, see large scale dumping below cost.
Sure.
That when that happens, the free trade model is being clearly subverted. For example, from our stable, I could quote the copper industry. It took us many, many years to eventually stem the huge tide of unfair dumping below cost that was happening in the copper business. So free trade zones can benefit trade, commerce, investment, so long as all the players involved are playing by the rules of the game, and there are adequate safeguards against any kind of uh, malpractice. So this sense of equity and equal participation in true spirit between all the signatories, I think, is far more important. Um, and I don't think that uh, something like the RCEP can be truly, effective as long as these core concerns are not addressed. So I think it's more about taking the inequality out of the equation as opposed to competitiveness. That's not the point here at all.
Right. No, absolutely. I think you make a very valid point, Mr. Birla. And one of the sessions we are having at this year's Asia Economic Dialogue 2021, of course, is focused on where the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is headed. Because we know that over the past few years now, work at the WTO has almost ground to a halt. But luckily now we have a new Director General for the WTO. We have a new administration in the United States. Let's hope that institutions at the global level, like the WTO, will be able to perform their work of ensuring free, but as rightly pointed out, fair and equal trade also. So I hope that we would go in the right direction henceforth. Um, if you permit me, sir, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the other areas in which you are involved and you have an interest. For example, we know that you are involved in higher education, not merely through the Birla Institutes of Technology at Pilani and other locations, but you are also on the board. You chair one of the IITs, the IIMs, and so there, if you permit me, I'd like to ask you a little bit about, the government has announced a new education policy. And one of the problems of the workplace has been that how do we ensure that our young people are properly trained and educated for the marketplace and not have to come into the marketplace and then be trained by companies like yours and in your group. Do you believe any significant changes are required in our higher education system? Because I think you're a thought leader not only in industry but across the whole spectrum of interlinked areas. So, if I could ask you this question about higher education in India.
So education is a cause that's very close to my heart, and as I say, a nation moves ahead on the feet of its children and young people. And as we know, we've reached a tipping point where the working population is going to soon exceed the dependent population in the country, and that's going to be there, the situation for at least the next, I believe, decade and a half to 2 decades. So building on human capital through education, through training, through skilling, I don't think we can ever overestimate the importance of that. The new education policy, I think, is a very comprehensive framework to guide the development of education in our country. If implemented right, I think it has a very far-reaching impact on the education landscape in our country. For example, opening up of higher education to foreign universities,
Mhm.
unshackling the large regulatory framework that has sat on this sector for a long time. The fact that it encourages academic institutions to feed off one another and to use the collective wisdom of several of them to advance progress. I think those are very encouraging features of this policy. You'll be happy to know that BITS Pilani has just launched its new management school by the name of BITSOM, which will be in the Mumbai metropolitan region, encouraged by the new education policy and by the kind of intent it shows of the government and the ministry to really open up the space of education in a very positive way. So I think lots happening on the front of education. Again, a lot of positive things in the right direction.
That's amazing news that Bitsong will open up in Mumbai. That's really interesting to hear that from you, Mr. Birla. And if I could ask you a related question, which is basically to do that, a big group like yours, the Aditya Birla Group, has obviously an extensive CSR program and contributes to efforts in education and I'm sure public health across the country. So which areas are you active in? How is it making a difference to our people? Do you have any interesting anecdotes in any of these areas in which your group companies are working in through CSR? We'd be very happy to hear any of these interesting anecdotes from you.
I believe, Mr. Bambawale, that uh, business groups like ours are to a large extent the product of our own legacy. The founder of our business house is my great grandfather, the late Mr. G.D. Birla. He had a great, kind of partnership, so to speak, with Mahatma Gandhi, and he was deeply influenced by the Mahatma's concept of trusteeship, that you hold these businesses, these assets in trust for the stakeholders, for the shareholders. And that is a philosophy that has seeped down the generations in our family. And I think we were practicing, and I say this more for the previous generations before me, CSR long before it became a buzzword.
Yes.
Uh, the CSR initiatives of our group are led by my mother, Mrs. Rajeshri Birla. And if I remember right, across 7,000 villages and impact the lives of almost 10 million people every day, every year. Some very interesting sectors: health, education, sustainable livelihood, infrastructure. Also, some very sort of sensitive areas in the space of social reform. And those are the ones that really move me the most. The fact that they take up issues that are the really difficult ones and high impact ones at the same time. For example, and you're talking about the back of beyond, largely in rural India, issues like female feticide, child marriages, dowryless marriages, illiteracy. And I think I feel very proud that in our own way, led by my mother, we are able to carry forward the legacy of my family and of the Aditya Birla Group, which truly believes that good citizenship by corporates is as important as the profits you make.
That was very moving indeed, Mr. Birla, and you're absolutely correct that you're building on the legacy of your family, which has a long history of contributing towards social upliftment and others. We're coming to the end of our time, I'm aware, but if you permit me, sir, I'll just take one question from the chat box, which some of our viewers have asked, some of our listeners have asked, some of our participants have asked. A number of them have asked something on these lines. So I'll just sum it up, and if you permit me, we'll make that
Of
the
course.
last question. And that is basically coming back to this last 1 year of the COVID-19 virus, of the pandemic, of the epidemic. And the question basically boils down to what are some of your personal reflections on the pandemic year? Can you please share those with us? Some personal
That's a very
reflections.
good question because this has been uh, a year of introspection for me, for sure, and I'm sure for a lot of us. Firstly, I think one has newfound respect for healthcare professionals, frontline workers. I have several doctor friends, and I feel a palpable sense of the selfless profession that they are in much more now than ever before. To me, also, like I said earlier, the role played by corporations and societies at large. It's important that corporations have a very humane side to them. I think that's as important as doing business right, and it's a little distinct from philanthropy in the classical sense. So, for example, a retailer who sets aside an extra, hour in the morning for senior citizens affected by the lockdown, um, who can come and shop before the rest of the customers start to come in. Stranded migrant workers who were provided with free recharges. Several examples of that of good corporate citizenship. And I think to me, being from the corporate world and seeped into it, it also highlighted the symbiotic relationship and the very stabilizing influence that large corporations have on smaller stakeholders, be they suppliers or uh, channel partners. Uh, I think that makes you feel a greater sense of ownership and a greater onus on how companies give back to society. And finally, we talked about a lot about the comorbidities this year,
Yes.
um, and I think that the importance of health, the importance of physical and sound mental health. Comorbidities can be fatal not just for a company but also for an individual. It made me think about the future of work from home, can work from home really be a feature that's here to stay? I don't think so. I don't think that culture building can happen with rhythm of work from home. So many new thoughts brought on by the pandemic, and so much of introspection, on matters that didn't feature on the radar screen at all up until now.
That was very insightful. And let me end by thanking you so much for sparing time from your very busy schedule, for being with us at the Asia Economic Dialogue 2021, Mr. Birla. That was been a fascinating discussion, fireside chat with you. Once again, on behalf of the Ministry of External Affairs of India and the Pune International Center, thank you very much for being with us, and all the very best for your future endeavors. Thank you, sir.
Bambawale, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.